A lot of people love living in Los Angeles. They love the energy, the culture, the neighborhoods, and the lifestyle. But when it comes to owning rental property, more and more investors may find themselves asking a very different question. Do I want to live in LA but invest somewhere else? And one of those places that keeps coming up in the conversation? You guessed it, Ventura County. Because while Los Angeles and Ventura are close geographically, they feel very different at times, especially from a landlord and investor standpoint. So in this video, I want to break down why someone might love living in LA, but feel more comfortable investing in nearby Ventura County, and what both buyers and investors need to understand before they make that decision. Hi, I'm Frank Spencer, Mr. Chatsworth, and on this channel, we talk about real estate, lifestyle, and what's happening here in Chatsworth, the surrounding valley communities, and in those nearby areas that affect how people choose to live and invest. And this is one of those topics that I think deserves thoughtful conversation, because this isn't about saying Los Angeles is bad. It really isn't. A lot of people love living in LA for a good reason. This is about something more practical. There's a difference between where you want to live and where you may want to own rental property. And when you start looking at local rent rules, relocation requirements, registration fees and rules, and operating risks that differ, the difference becomes a lot easier to understand. So let's start with the obvious question. Why in the hell would anyone want to live in LA but invest in Ventura County? And the answer is simple. People don't always choose a place for the same reason. They may choose a place to live because of lifestyle, proximity to work, schools, culture, restaurants, family, familiarity. But they may want a place to invest for a completely different reason. Maybe cash flow, predictability, regulatory environment, ease of management, and long-term risk. And that's where Los Angeles and Ventura can start to separate a little bit. In the city of Los Angeles, many older multifamily properties are subject to the rent stabilization ordinance, which applies to many rental units built on or before October 1st, 1978. The city also requires annual registration of covered units and has local no-fault eviction rules that can trigger relocation assistance with landlord declarations required before certain move-out notices can even be served. In short, when your lease is up and you want to sell, you could be put in a position where you have to pay your tenant upwards of $20,000 or more, depending on who lives in the house, what their health status is, and how long they've lived there. It's a steep price to pay. And in the unincorporated Los Angeles County, while owners may be subject to a separate local framework under the county's rent stabilization and tenant protections ordinance, the county programs limit annual increases for covered units, requires a rent registry and annual registration fees for covered properties, and may require relocation assistance for no-fault evictions. For 2025, the county states that annual increases for fully covered units are limited to 60% of CPI, but capped at 3% with additional notice and self-certification requirements for smaller landlords. So if you own rental property in LA, whether in the city or certain unincorporated areas, you may be dealing with more layers of regulation, more local compliance, and in some cases more costs when trying to raise rents to cover possession or recover possession of a unit. Ventura often feels simpler by comparison. From what I can verify, Ventura appears to rely much more heavily on statewide California law, especially the Tenant Protection Act, TPA, rather than broad LA-style local rent stabilization across the county, state law generally caps annual increases at 5% plus the CPI, up to 10% maximum, and requires just cause rules and 1 month of relocation assistance for certain no-fault terminations on covered properties. That doesn't mean Ventura is unregulated, because it isn't. The city of Ventura has been working on local tenant issues, including anti-harassment rules, rental registry, and tenant protection discussions and short-term rental regulation. But in general, the operating environment appears less layered than what many owners face in the city of LA. And for an investor, that matters, because fewer layers often mean more predictability, easier compliance, less surprise, and a cleaner management environment. And this is where the conversation just gets practical. Most investors are not just asking, can I buy a rental property? They're asking, how easy will it be to operate? How exposed am I to regulatory risk? And how much control do I really have over my own asset? That's where LA starts to feel heavier for many homeowners. Not necessarily because the property itself is bad, but because the rules around the property can become more restrictive, certainly more expensive, more time-consuming, and more difficult to navigate. In LA, local rent restrictions, registration requirements, and relocation rules make the ownership experience just more complex. Ventura, while still governed by California state landlord-tenant law, may feel more straightforward to some investors because it relies less on the kind of deep local overlay that you see in LA. Remember this: overlay translates to greater restriction. And when investors are comparing counties, that difference really matters. Now let me say something important here, and I really need to. This is not a criticism of LA as a place to live, because a lot of people absolutely love living here, and I'm certainly one of them. They love neighborhoods, they love the energy, the restaurants, the diversity, the convenience, the identity of being in Los Angeles, and those are real benefits. For many people, LA is exactly where they want to build their life, but the place that feels best emotionally is not always the place that feels best financially for rental ownership. And that is the distinction this video really hopes to communicate. You may love living in LA and still decide that Ventura, for a number of reasons, makes more sense for your investment dollars. That's not a contradiction. It's a strategy. So what should someone take away from all of this if they're thinking about buying rental property? Here's what I'd say. Before you buy, don't just ask, what city do I like? What area feels familiar? Where do I enjoy spending time? Also ask, what are the rules that I'm going to operate my rental business under? What are the local ordinances? And again, I want you to think overlays. Are there local registration requirements? What are the relocation obligations? How much control will I really have if I need to reposition the property later? And how easy or difficult will this be to manage over time? Because rental property is not about location. It's about the operating environment attached to that location. And that environment can affect profitability, flexibility, and risk. Ultimately, your long-term comfort as an owner is on the line here. If there's one thing I want viewers to understand, it's this. There's a difference between where you live and where you want to invest. LA may still be the place you love calling home, but Ventura County may offer a cleaner, less restrictive path for rental ownership because it's free from the risk of you being stuck in a perpetual contract with your tenants, depending on the kind of investor you are and the kind of property you want to own. And again, that doesn't mean Ventura is perfect, and it doesn't mean that Los Angeles is wrong. It simply means smart investors should compare counties not just by price or location, but by the rules that shape the ownership experience after the purchase. And those rules matter more than most people realize. So if you love living in Los Angeles, but you've been wondering whether a nearby market like Ventura County might make more sense for rental property, I think it's a very reasonable question. And it's one worth asking before you buy, not after. If you found this helpful and you care about making smart real estate decisions here in the Valley and its nearby communities, I post weekly videos covering market shifts, local insights, practical strategies designed to help buyers and sellers and investors make better decisions. And if you're thinking about selling, well, I wrote a guide for you. It's called Avoiding a Failed Sale, How to Sell Smart and Walk Away Without Regret. You can download it for free at my website, www.mrchatsworth.com/ebook. And if you have questions about LA, Ventura County, or how local rental rules can affect ownership strategy, drop them in the comments. I promise you, I read and answer every single one of them. And until next time, I'll see you around the neighborhood.